Defense Minister Gallant has visited Gaza, especially the southern part of Rafah and Khan Yunis earlier this week. And he said explicitly, the war in Gaza is basically over. We, the IDF, defeated the last remaining brigade of Hamas, and the center of gravity of the conflict, because it is larger than the Gaza campaign, must move northward.
Gallant may think the war in Gaza is over, but it looks like Netanyahu never got the memo, because he, for political reasons, needs to at least present a picture of a war that goes on, because as long as the war goes on, you cannot have political recriminations over the debacle of October 7th. That's Netanyahu's game. But I agree with Amir. I mean, the war in Gaza right now was at a very, very, very low ebb. And I have to say, a government that was responsible to its citizenry to an even minimal degree would prioritize at this point a deal to get out the hostages while they're still alive. Now, as for the North, you have an insane situation where this is going on for almost 11 months at this point. And the bottom line is Israel has been deterred from responding properly, per what the residents of the North think, not only because of the classic lesson from Napoleonic times to World War II, that you shouldn't have two fronts at the same time, but really because of the rockets.
Unless you're Israel.
Well, indeed, something like 7 fronts. No, they're deterred because the rockets that could be fired at Tel Aviv and bring down office towers here. Now, it's not clear to what degree Hezbollah is bluffing about its willingness to enter a real war with Israel. The military probably is inclined to, certainly to have plans and possibly to implement those plans, but it's a gamble. It really is a gamble. And I've been saying for a while that before blundering into Lebanon for a third or fourth time, depending on whether you count the incursion in the 1970s, blunderings which have never turned out well, I would prefer to see an internationalization of the problem of Lebanon. Hezbollah is a global problem, certainly a regional problem. It attaches to a truly historic problem, which is the Islamic regime in Iran. And Lebanon is a failed state. And they won't admit it, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of Lebanese would welcome an intervention.
Yeah, your thoughts on that?
Well, Dan is right, of course. Every war must end with some sort of a political solution or equation or formula. Israel will have to negotiate with Lebanon, perhaps with mediation, UN, US, France.
What would be that defining moment for negotiations to be started? I mean, is it now when we're still getting barrages?
Yes, it is now, because Iran does not want a full-fledged war.
The Hezbollah was able to amass all this weaponry and this amount of rockets, including guided missiles, because of Israel's failure to prevent the smuggling, much of which went through Syria. Israel's entire strategy with Hezbollah was to believe they're deterred because of 2006.
I was only talking about from October the 8th until this present, not throughout the years.
I'm broadening out what I believe to have been a major strategic failure. They believed Hezbollah was deterred. Here and there, they attacked convoys of weapons headed from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. But they failed to prevent the amassing of a massive arsenal.
But you know, it was
that currently constitutes a deterrent.
It was self-deterrence because there was no domestic support for a war of choice. As you mentioned, after 1982, no sane government would go on a war it cannot justify. It is waiting for the disaster and then
so that's the moment we find ourselves in, actually, because Hezbollah hasn't yet avenged the assassination of their chief of military staff, Shukr. But they have upped the ante. They've raised the level of the flames by firing more rockets and being less careful about firing at areas that have been evacuated. Now, it's only a matter of time until another tragedy like Majd al-Shams happens, where children, a lot of people, whatever, are killed. Now, consider, again, the rank strategic failure of this government at this moment. I'm not talking now about the last 15 years, at this moment. If that happens, if the thing I'm saying is statistically inevitable happens, then Israel will react. And that reaction could embroil everyone in a regional war.
Which is exactly what the IDF and Gallant have been saying to the public and to Netanyahu. We have to close shop in Gaza in order to prepare and move our forces. The 3 divisional headquarters in Gaza are not available for the North right now.
And this is why you end up at this moment in Israel having even people who are not generally saber-rattling warmongers. I don't think I am, and I know Amir's writing in Haaretz, and he's certainly not. Even normative people, who are moderate people, are considering it reasonable to initiate some kind of action against Hezbollah. And I must say, also against Iran. Now, Israel will think a million times before taking on Iran with its 90 million people almost. But the idea of somehow inviting or engineering a Western attack on Iran is not necessarily insane, considering that Iran's strategy is something we understand very well. They're waiting to get nuclear weapons or true threshold status, which will give them such deterrent power that they can then deploy Hezbollah in the way they want to deploy Hezbollah. And at that point, we'll be in a much more difficult situation. And the regime in Iran, by the way, is weak, detested by the majority of the population. And I'm sure a security expert like Amir, much though he may be skeptical about attacking Iran, could devise an attack plan that would be effective.
But that ties the 2 topics in which you opened the show. The hostage deal negotiations and the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah.
This is not the right time for the Biden-Harris administration to initiate anything vis-a-vis Iran or any other war.
Right.
When Trump and his vice presidential candidate Vance are saying we shouldn't get involved in any foreign wars, only protect our homeland border.
That's why the key date for Iran, if they want to continue being ridiculous, is November 6th.
Okay.
The day after the election.
Because November 5th is Sarah Netanyahu's birthday.
Oh, wow.
A Trump victory would be a nice gift.
The important thing, as Dan said, is to get an agreement. And because everybody knows what I just said, it means that it is not out of negligence. It is out of malice. Someone very high in the Israeli government does not want an agreement, regardless of the benefits to Israel.
Shall I translate? I think on October 7th, Netanyahu understood that he cannot win the discussion about October 7th. He declared war on Hamas, which was reasonable. And the 2 goals seemed potentially not to clash, although one had to wonder. Eliminate Hamas from power and return all the hostages. But the key thing was the subtext, which began immediately, where Netanyahu said, as long as the war goes on, then we can have political repercussions. That creates an obvious incentive for the war to go on forever. Not only that, but for the crisis to escalate, to ever escalate to the point where we're talking about a disaster bigger than October 7th. Now, I don't like to hear myself saying this, and I know very well that much of the public doesn't want to hear it. Look, I suspect a lot of our colleagues here at I24 don't want to hear it. It's a truth that must not be told. It is a horror that you want to run away from, to think that is the case. But at this point, good Lord, the entire security establishment, 3/4 of the people of Israel in every poll, the negotiators leaking every other day of the week are saying the deal is within reach. We agreed to these terms on May 31st, and Netanyahu refuses to do the deal.
Well, again, Reuters attributed like a lot of the Western diplomats and officials saying exactly that.
And look,
that he keeps changing the...
And if Netanyahu, and the Americans are leaking it too, now you can sort of understand, because if he does the deal, I do assess that the threats of the extreme right parties in his coalition to bring down the government are real. So his government will fall, and he'll face elections before the polls have turned. So...
And he has his trial, in which on December the 2nd, he must testify.
That's right.
And regardless.
And yes, and well, regardless, unless something happens.
We will see, because as long as the war goes on, there's already been a lot of delays in this trial, because Netanyahu is able to say, well, I'm running a war. Now,
Yeah.
understand, this means people are dying. And the hostages are dying in prison, in
As we're
captivity,
seeing, as the
one
six
by
that just
one,
came- yeah.
in order to enable, possibly, in order to enable this political outcome.
And it's inane to call it total victory, the goal, because even if it is compatible, and it is not, because Sinwar is holding the hostages, especially the soldiers, as his life insurance policy. And he is not going to go down without killing all of them. And because of that, even assuming that there is some possible scenario in which Israel wins in Gaza, it will not be total, and there are these other fronts. Gaza is merely one front, one campaign in a wider war. So there cannot be total victory in one small place where all the rest is ablaze.
There's another reason why there cannot be total victory, which is a total victory would really mean the elimination of Hamas from power in Gaza. Now, if you do that, you need to create an alternative to Hamas in Gaza. The political force on planet Earth that has been rejecting all efforts to create that alternative is the Prime Minister of Israel. There have been concrete offers on the table, and not the Palestinian Authority as it currently stands. There's a real possibility to revise the PA, to bring in figures that have broad support and that know how to run a proper police state without, a terrorist militia being the real power, to wit, Mohammed Dahlan. There are a lot of options. There are notions about huge aid to Gaza and international assistance on the security side. Yeah. The person preventing that for about 7 months now is Netanyahu. Why? Because the minute he does that, the far right brings down his government.
Even the only advocate for Netanyahu's tactics until today, a retired colonel named John Spencer, who is the head of urban warfare studies at the West Point Military Academy in New York, came out with a piece in Foreign Affairs in which he begs, doesn't mention Netanyahu, begs Israel to let the Palestinian Authority enter Gaza, because otherwise there will be a vacuum. Harris very skillfully showed continuity. It's just like a pilgrim going through the Stations of the Cross. She touched on all the watchwords. Never again, of course, never again,
Right,
not only
exist.
October the 7th, everybody understands. Also, defend Israel, defend, but not take part in an offensive operation. The suffering in Gaza, freedom and dignity, that is Palestinian statehood, should the conditions be met. So whoever wrote her speech
was being politically correct. It was trying not to ruffle.
And what you mentioned regarding AOC,
Yeah.
She is now part of the establishment. She went to the center. She wants to be part of the leadership in the House, and the so-called squad has been splintered.
I feel that Amir and I have been agreeing too much today. And that's not the best television.
So disagree.
So I think I'm going to use this opportunity.
This is not Crossfire. This is I24 fire.
No, but still a little spice. I agree, of course, that she presented continuity and she ticked every box. What I found missing is any spark of creativity. I also found missing anything truly heartfelt. With Biden, you know that if Israel self-destructs, which is a direction the current government is taking it in, then Biden will suffer personally. And if he's still around. And I did not get that feeling from Kamala Harris. She did tick every box. And basically, as the continuity candidate, who is going to arm Israel, make sure it can, defend itself and support its right to self-defense, but too many people died in Gaza, and critically, the Palestinians must have self-determination. That is exactly the Democratic Party orthodoxy for the past 30 years, and what it means is that she'll continue to be at loggerheads with the right religious branch of Israel, exactly as Biden has been, as Obama was, as basically Clinton was.
So, but even if she were to win, I mean, do you think, from the standpoint, if you're Sinwar, if you're Iran, like what, especially given how these countries, think of women, like is she, no matter what policy she chooses, who she has around her, I mean, are they going to,
pre-election pledges are not important.
Exactly.
All she had to do was avoid some verbal pitfalls.
She did.
Yes.
She's a lot younger than President
For her,
Biden.
being creative was dangerous.
I tend to agree. But look, it exposed one basic lie of the current government in Israel. The basic lie of the government in Israel is that the PLO / Fatah / the PA are the same thing as Hamas. They're equally as bad. That's a transparent and ridiculous lie. Another lie that they haven't been saying out loud, but is constantly in the leaked comments and in the music, is that the Republicans are friends and the Democrats not so much, maybe even the opposite. Now, it's reckless of the government of Israel at the head of a country that lives and dies by the support it gets from the U.S. And has always been a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. to risk alienating half of America. But what we saw at the convention belies the lie, because we see polls that say that 80% of Americans still back Israel. It's obviously not Gen Z and these confused progressives, where half basically don't. Now, that's a problem that will become a potentially debilitating problem in 20 years' time when they're running the country. Hopefully by then they mature. But if 80% support Israel...
If they're not all canceled by then.
If 80% support Israel, that includes a majority of the Democrats.
Right.
And that's what we saw at the convention.
And a few days before the convention, they okayed the $20 billion arms deal with Israel.
Yes.
Without them, without the military, technology, money, Israel wouldn't survive.
And the umbrella at the UN Security Council. Without the American veto, I dare say Israel could well be facing at this point not only an arms embargo, but economic sanctions. So the attitude of this government, just to add to its just embarrassingly long list of sins, is the sin of ingratitude.
Right.
And the way that they present the Biden administration. It's frankly disgraceful.
Because they are banking on the ignorance of their own political base.
Yeah, that's sad.
Well, but I mean, the momentum surely has switched in, in such a rapid way. I mean, and also, but for President Biden, I mean, I think, he has said that this is his long-term goal and his legacy is solving this crisis in the Middle East. I mean, do you think it will get solved by the time the inauguration happens?
I think on November 6th, we're going to see a U.S. administration that has 2.5 months to maybe do some different and brave things. And Harris, by the way, you said, well, the Muslim world might not respect her as a woman and this sort of thing. That will give her an incentive to make them respect the power of the United States. And there's some leverage that the U.S. can bring to bear, by the way, on Israel as well, but certainly on Iran, for example. Now, there's a deal to be done with Iran where we don't mess you up very badly if you stand down from your project of creating mayhem all over the Middle East.
Yeah.
And if you don't, we will. Now, Biden was too weak-kneed to do that. Someone should. What Harris did in the polls so far is to undo the effect of Biden appearing to be implausibly incapacitated.
Yeah.
That's what caused him to be behind Trump in the polls.
But the question is, will that momentum continue in November? Yeah.
She did nothing more than undo that. And now she's ahead by 3, maybe 4% in the poll.
But it's mainly getting people back that were getting cold feet
Emily,
because of Biden's.
that's not enough to win. In America, it's thought. In general, in the world, it's thought that elections are won in the center. That's why Clinton did his triangulation, and it seemed to work.
Yeah.
But you have to remember something else. About 40% of American eligible voters don't vote. The tacking to the center thing works very well if participation is 100% or close to it, the way it used to be in Israel and the way it is in some European countries. If participation is only 60%, that raises the other issue, which is that you can't afford to lose your base. Now, that depends, therefore, on vehemence. If the progressive base in America, which is only 10 to 15%, and it's these clueless young people that we just saw on TV.
With masks.
If they're vehement and they don't go out to vote, that's a problem. And I think they'll be doing massive polling to figure out if that threat is real. And we'll see her, I think, continuing to tack to the center, then tack to the left, and do anything
right now
to maximize the vote.
She did manage to generate energy and enthusiasm. Whether it will be enough for the longer haul remains to be seen.